Right now, as my responsibility is in the head of the department, I'm also the nodal officer for the COVID-19 lab. Although this RT-PCR, since it dealt mainly with the principle and the technology, I've tried to keep COVIDization apart as far as possible. But now I think it has ingrained so much into our lives that it might have been a little difficult task for me. Now, before that, just let me, wake you up and ask you that if I ask you that which of them is true regarding these following, I just want you to note it down like a pre-test as to which of these you feel are true and the rest are false. An RT-PCR as compared to a traditional PCR is actually an automated platform which gives results in 2 hours compared to 24 hours in a traditional PCR. Second one is that cybergreen is a dye which binds only single-stranded nucleic acids. A sample whose CT value is 3 cycles earlier than another has actually 8 times more template. The CT value is more important than the shape of the curve as seen in the analysis of RT-PCR result. Multiplexing is not at all possible in RT-PCR. Now let's try to find these answers in the next few slides that I'm going to take you through. I'm sure all of you know quite a lot about real-time PCR by now, because now it has become the buzzword not only in microbiology but in other fields of diagnostic laboratory as well. So the attendee should be able to know what a PCR is, real-time PCR is, find out the difference between the two, determine the principle and technology, define the CT and understand its interpretation, because a lot of WhatsApp GAN is going on cycle threshold, which really amuses us microbiologists when we sit on the other side of the table. Know the automated platforms which are available for RT-PCR. Now, if you look at the polymerase chain reaction, we all know that Kary Mullis was awarded Nobel Prize in 1993 after a long legal battle which was fought regarding who developed the RT-PCR. But the credit went to him as he was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1993. And basic principle of PCR, as we all know that, is that it starts from a nucleic acid, which on denaturing forms into 2 strands, and then we attach a small primer which anneals, and then the primer extends, and this way we go on creating 2 raised to the power n number of copies, where n is the number of cycles that we are creating. Now, if you look at the conventional PCR based testing platforms, there are 2 things. One is that you have to extract the DNA and RNA. You have to amplify that DNA or RNA. And then you have to detect these amplified products, because now they have reached a stage where the number has increased to such an extent which can be put onto a gel electrophoresis plate or use an enzyme linked hybridization, and the detection is made. Now, this was a little time consuming process, because this RNA DNA extraction with manually would itself take about 2 to 3 hours. The amplification would take another 3 to 4 hours, and then the detection would take another 4 to 5 hours. So in all, even if you run the sample from start to finish in one run, you will not get the results in less than 14 to 15 hours. Now, the recipe of PCR was very simple. It had a template DNA, it had reaction buffers, it had some salts which were required, it had the DTNPs, the primers, and the DNA polymerase or RNA polymerase, depending on what the situation was. And if we were doing an RNA PCR, then a reverse transcriptase enzyme. But all said and done, man always wants best and better. And so we went on to develop the various variants of PCR, where there was a colony PCR, a nested PCR, multiplexing PCR. But right now we are content with talking about the real-time PCR, which has now become a day-to-day word. Even the layman knows, leave alone the clinicians, even the layman knows now as to what the real-time PCR is. So what was wrong with PCR was, one was an end time detection. So only after 14 hours would you come to know that your reaction has actually gone wrong and there is no amplified product in your tube. Then it was technically much more demanding to make a gel, to make wells in it, to run that gel electrophoresis, the voltages and everything. It was time consuming. And agarose gels itself had a lot of problems. They had low sensitivity, they were poor precision, they had short dynamic range, and it would take 4 to 6 hours for the gel itself to run. So, and it was not possible to automate that part and reduce from 4 to 6 hours to maybe a few hours. So we went on to develop something which gave a real-time monitoring, and this was the first paper which was published by a Japanese group, where they were basically working with Roche, where they developed a quantitative assay, and they used a video camera to monitor the polymerase chain reactions simultaneously during cycling. And the camera showed them how the double-stranded DNA was accumulating and the fluorescence was increasing when they had bound it with ethidium bromide. So this is which laid foundations of a real-time PCR, that in real time can we monitor the amplification so that we don't end up with an empty tube and come to know about it after 14 hours. So how does it work? Principally is that these steps will remain same. The sample collection, nucleic acid extraction, amplification. Now the problem comes that how does PCR differ from traditional PCR is this step. The amplification is not just an empty amplification. It is linked in such a manner that there is a fluorescent signal, and this signal is then trapped by the camera, and then it is fed to the computer, which then records it and shows it to you. So the moment you load the PCR master mix here, the camera starts recording. So it forms 2 copies, the camera records 4 copies, it inverts. So this goes on increasing. And these are the various platforms which are available for real-time PCR machines. This is our own laboratory in Maulana Azad, where we have these 5 PCR platforms of various manufacturers. Then we have what is the basic fundamental and how did it differ was that there were many variants which were developed. Man is never satisfied with one thing. So first we developed a fluorescent dye which was a real-time based. So whenever we had a double-stranded template, the dye would bind to it. This is the principle of cybergreen, which would bound to it. As the number of copies increased, these fluorescent signal increased. The other was to have a probe which is bound with a fluorescent dye. So every time the DNA multiplied, the copies increased, this probe also started increasing, and you would see more of fluorescence which was emitted in this. So basically it monitors the fluorescent which is emitted in the reaction as an indicator of an amplicon production at each cycle as compared to an end which you see in a PCR. So what are the various dyes which we use in real-time PCR? One, as I said, is the cybergreen dye, which binds to the double-stranded DNA. Then you have the various hybridization probes which are there, and then you have Tachman probes. Very often you will hear a Tachman probe chemistry is there, or molecular beacons are there, scorpions are there. Now, if I go on explaining each one of them, the talk will stretch into half a day rather than half an hour. So the basic fundamental is that there is a fluorescent signal and there is a quencher. As this starts to progress, it's elongated, this quencher gets removed from this and the fluorescent signal is detected. So the product, as it starts amplifying, it starts developing into a graph. Now this graph, if you see here, is a typical sigmoidal shaped graph. What we see, something like microbiologists are very familiar with this graph. The AST is measured in this graph. The bacterial growth is measured in this type of graph. So this is an amplification plot which is seen, which is measuring the number of cycles which are proceeding to the fluorescence which is changing. So any increase in the fluorescence which occurs above the baseline is detected by the system. Any fluorescent signal which remains below this threshold is not detected. That means there is no amplicon production or no template production. Now what each of these terminologies are. So if you see that if the sample gets diluted by 10 times, then the signal, the time to which the cycle that it takes to multiply also increase. Similarly, if you dilute the symbol 100 times, then the number of cycle it will take to reach that threshold will further increase. So that's how the CT becomes reversely proportional to the number of time that it is taking. Then there comes your certain terminologies which you're very familiar with, the correlation coefficient, which measures the accuracy of this standard curve, and it should be 1. That means 1 means that if it is moving 1, then the y-axis is also moving 1. Then efficiency of 100% corresponds to a slope, ideal slope of 3 or 3.2. So the efficiency of PCR action should be 100%, but then there are other structures like the GC content of the amplicon, the length of the amplicon, the enfoldings of the amplicons, which can make a difference. And then what is the baseline? The baseline is the PCR cycles in which the reporter fluorescence signal is accumulating but remains beneath the limit of detection of the system. Whereas the delta Rn is the increment of fluorescence signal which occurs with each cycle, which you can see on this axis. Then the threshold is the chosen value for each cycle, which you say that this is the threshold. If I see above this or below this, that is how I'm going to measure these thresholds. So CT is the basic principle actually of real-time PCR and is an essential component in producing accurate and reproducible data. So it is a cycle number at which the fluorescence signal crosses the threshold, and it is inversely proportional to the starting amount of the target. It's useful in calculating the initial number as well. But if you have a very late CT value, say around 40, if this continues, the line continues below the threshold and suddenly around at 40, it starts to increase, then it should not be included in calculations. Most of the assays give a CT value of about 32 to 40, keeping in mind that if it is after this, then it is probably the target is missing in the sample. Now, if you see the ideal plot, this is one of the photographs from our laboratory. If you see this, you can see the number of reactions which are there. They are all crossing the threshold at different points. You can see these points which are there. There are many which have not crossed at all. These are clear-cut negatives, but there are many which have crossed at different stages. Say this one is probably the last one to cross the threshold, and that is approximately 35. So anything which crosses after this will not be taken as positive. Now, all curves may not be sigmoid. Even though we say that the shape of the curve is very important, but you have to realize that it is a combination of both the CT value as well as the curve, which becomes very important. And many times you will see that there will be many curves. You see this? These are not sigmoidal curves. There are only few which are there. The rest of them which you see here, and they are above threshold, but they have risen above the threshold after 30, 35, and they are not following the curve as well. Then sometimes relying only the CT values can give you a very erroneous result. See here, if this is the threshold has been crossed, but there is no curve. So this sample should ideally be given as negative and not as positive. Samples will give you your threshold is 35, but you get an excellent curve. Here you have to, this is what we usually label as indeterminate and repeat the sample, because here what we are seeing is that although it has crossed the threshold at 35, and if your lab control is at 35, or if you've taken as 35 as your cutoff CT value, then you'll have to be a little more careful as to whether you take this or not. Now, this is below 30, but no sigmoidal. So the other assays can give you a variable result. Now, you can also have a standard curve and a quantification. Why do we call a real-time PCR a quantifiable PCR? Is that a dilution series of known template concentrations can be used to establish a standard curve for determining the initial amount of target template. And the log of each of these...
Hello, Harshit, I am in a Zoom meeting, so... Okay.
I think everyone should please mute themselves.
So the log of each of these concentration is then plotted against the CT value, and you will get a reverse of that. This we all know from our primary mathematics, that when we reverse this curve, this is what exactly we get. And this will give you a log concentration against the cycle number. Now from this standard curve, one can get a lot of information, the slope, the y-intercept, the correlation coefficient, and so many things. Now, what are the controls that we are using in this? Usually an abundant or constantly expressed housekeeping gene. For example, in COVID-19, we have the RNSPS gene. Which are the ones which are least reliable? We do use that. Then best is to run a validity test with a selected endogenous control, and the combination should be used. Now, can we multiplex RT-PCR? Yes, definitely we can multiplex the RT-PCR. We can have a target. For example, there is a multiplexing of RT-PCR for a meningitis panel or for respiratory panel, where we have different dyes which is tagged to different target and different melting points for each targets. But you require a lot of optimization, a lot of R&D into it, and it should be a very robust assay and should be able to detect all these in different terms. Now, when you want to quantify, there are various methods of quantification: absolute method, relative method, and comparative methods. Now, very often we hear the term that during this pandemic, a quantitative assay has been relegated to a qualitative assays. Now, that demands a huge debate and will be beyond this talk. But one thing we all have to remember, that the samples that we take sometimes are not sufficient enough to give you a viral load concentration or determination accordingly. So how do we go about this? In absolute quantification, we have to construct an absolute standard curve for each target. And the standard curve is based on serial dilution of a sample with a known copy number. CT of each standard sample is then plotted against the logarithm of the known concentrate, like I showed you in the previous curve. And then it is used to estimate concentrations of unknown sample. So it's a good method, efficient method, and a good predictive value. In relative quantification, you use the housekeeping gene, or you do a normalization where you quantify the gene expression. The measured amount of RNA from the gene of interest is then divided by the amount of RNA from a housekeeping gene in order to have a relative quantification. Then you have a comparative CT method, possibly the easiest method, which involves comparing CT values of a sample with a control or a calibrator or a non-treated sample. And both of these is then normalized to a endogenous housekeeping gene. And that is how you get a CT value of control and the sample. And this, by using a formula, you can use this to compare. Now, what are the various ways of automating the RT-PCR? There are multiple platforms, because we have realized after some time that it is a time consuming process, number one. It is a technically demanding process. And third, it involves a lot of biosafety and a lot of other procedures, which you will see in my next presentation, which is on lab design, as to why we needed to automate these systems. Now, these automations can be a low throughput automation, which is in the form of, these are all, the names which are here are all trademarks. So you have a Cepheid gene expert, which tells you an MDR gene for tuberculosis in few hours as compared to a RT-PCR, which is going to take ages. Then a TrueNat system, which is indigenously developed by MolBio in India. Then you have an Abbott ID now, which is based on an isothermal nucleic acid amplification technology. It was available in US till now. I don't know what the status is right now in India. I don't think it's available still now. And then you have a BioFire DX, which functions on a multiplexed microarray based multiplexing system. So you have a meningitis panel, a respiratory panel, and so on and so forth. But most of these are based on 2 or 3 things. They are either based on a sample prep area and an amplification and detection. So the test base is simply loaded onto the machine. There is no need to manually or automatically extract the RNA. And then you have a transfer cartridge where it goes, the swab goes inside, and this receiving area goes inside the machine. You shut the machine and it's done. So the best thing about these low throughput machines is that they can work into setups which are not very tertiary or secondary care oriented setups. They can work in a semi-primary or a community-based platforms as well. Then there are high throughput robotic automations. For example, the Roche Cobas 6800 or 8800, which has been developed during this pandemic itself. It's a completely robotic platform. Currently, there are about 7 or 8 machines in the whole country. Its cost is between 4 to 5 crores, and it's a robotic platform. So you just put the samples here, and the robotic arms will load it into the machine, must prepare the master mix. It is the whole RT-PCR system, but in a huge system. And obviously, since it's a robotic based, it takes a lot of space, and it takes a lot of occupies a lot of controls, and other things are also there with it. Then there is a DiaSorin molecular simplexa, which can do about 96 tests in a single automated manner. There is an analytical Jenna Q Tower. I don't know how many of these are available. I think except Roche Cobas, most of these are not available in India. Then there are a few which are basically robotic based, but are liquid handling systems, which when coupled with an RT-PCR system can make an automated system machines, and that's how they can function. So the advantages of using these is that you just fill it, forget it, and shut it. So this is just a diagram showing you how it works with MTB, and how this has been working for quite a number of years now in the tuberculosis control program, and now the TB elimination program. It was the first automated system to be approved by ICMR for COVID testing, also as an complete automated platform. Now, these systems give you rapid result. They have a very small footprint. Many systems have sample tubes with lysis buffers, so you do not need VTM collection tubes separately. But this also works as their disadvantage, that you need to have a lysis buffer tube which is indigenous to that machine. If they have a lysis buffer system, then you do not ideally need a biosafety cabinet. They are mostly point of care. So they are mobile, molecular, or near patient testing, and they are compact and expandables. So coming back to the questions, I hope, I'm sure most of you got it quite right. There was only one correct, that is that if the CT is 3 times earlier, then it has more template. Now, why I had asked this was primarily because many a times it's a very confusing terminology. Higher the CT, higher the load. No, the lower the CT, that means the number of sample amplicon which was there in the sample initially was less. And since it was less, it was very rapid to multiply it, and so the number of cycles that it took to reach a threshold was less. So we have to understand this. Now, one thing is that although I gave you how the CT can work to quantify PCR, for newer viruses, for newer diseases, we do not know what the threshold actually is. It is a threshold that we've made with our experience in the past few weeks only. The rest of the PCRs have been developed with quite some time, and they have been growing around. For example, when we look at the viral load of HIV, HBV, or HCV, we have a milliliter of blood and we correlate it with the viral copies. So you actually trying to say that it is, you have to absolutely quantify it, get the limit of detection of each system, correlate that limit of detection with the CT value, and say that these are the viral copies which are there per ml before you embark upon and say that it can be used quantitatively. Best it can be used is a semi-quantitative estimation and should have nothing to do with the patient management. So with that, I rest my case for this first part of the presentation, but I will start with the second one, that is the PCR design. Actually, I had made it as a 2 presentation, but it should be actually just one. Just give me a minute.
While Dr. Sonal is, loading her second presentation, if there's any question, I can't see any on the chat box, but if there's any question, we would be, maybe we can take one question while she's loading her. Okay, it's done.
Can you see?
Yeah, we can see. Thank you, Sonal.
So after the principle and the technology, let me take you through how do you design this thing. And again, just a few questions as to how we go about designing a laboratory. Now, do you think that a laboratory design plays no role in controlling contamination in molecular laboratory? Or a master mix area should have a negative pressure area? If you have an automated extractor, then there is actually no need to have a biosafety cabinet. The movement in the RT-PCR lab should be from an amplicon-free area to a product-rich area. The separation in lab should be for personnel as well as supplies. Now, these are 5 pertinent questions which come to your mind whenever you design a laboratory for RT-PCR, or you try and adapt your laboratory to RT-PCR, what we have done in the past 6 months. Most of the laboratories were not in medical colleges which had the space, the manpower, and the infrastructure. Still, if we have more than 1,200 laboratories testing right now on RT-PCR module, then these people have adapted in whatever tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities with their own experiences, with their own challenges, keeping in mind these factors, which I'm going to take you through in the last. So you should be able to describe the flow and the movement in PCR laboratory, describe the design of RT-PCR laboratory, and enumerate the equipment and consumables required in each section, and describe the biosafety requirements and the processes which are required in an RT-PCR lab. Now, quality is the key, because first of all, our biggest problem when we talk about real-time PCR is to have a contamination. The more the automation, the more our chances of having contamination. If you are manually extracting RNA, the chances of contamination in a bulk are very limited. Can you think of why this happens? This happens because in manual, you extract in batches of 12, 24, maximum 48. If you're likely to contaminate one batch, you're likely to repeat 12 or 24. If a place like ours, which has a MagnaPure 96 extractor, if one batch of extraction fails, that means all 96 have to be repeated. That means another 2.5 hours gone. So you have to ensure that the quality policies and standards are in place. You have to make your own standard operating procedures depending on your lab infrastructure, your manpower, and the equipments and consumables that you have. You have to develop your own assay techniques and processes which have to be standardized. You have to have your own validated methods, or you have to use methods which have been validated elsewhere but have been adopted in your SOPs. And you have to use appropriate quality control. Then the staff, how many people are going to go into extraction? Have they been adequately trained? Just because somebody can do pipetting doesn't mean they can run a molecular lab. What is their competency? Then what are the various instruments and consumables which are available? How are the instruments being calibrated? Are they certified? Is the quality manual available? And how the laboratory is being maintained? What are the systems which are in place or which need to be put into place? The standard operating procedures, this is the standard operating procedures which we developed specifically for SARS-CoV-2. And these have been adopted by Delhi government for its laboratories. So these are available on the website of Maulana Azad Medical College as well as on Delhi government for anybody who wants to download them and adopt them in their own laboratory. Then why we are bothered about contamination is whenever there is an unwanted nucleic acid which runs into our system, we call it a contamination. Now, if we are repeatedly amplifying the same target sequence, it leads to accumulation of amplified product in the laboratory environment. And this typical PCR generates as many as 10 to the power 9 copies of target sequence, and aerosol from pipettes can contain as high as 10 to the power 6 amplification products. So if any of this find their way into our system, it's going to contaminate the whole run. So what are the various sources of this? This can be due to an amplicon product contamination. They could come from surfaces, they could come from ventilation ducts, they could come from reagents and supplies, from the clothes, hair, skin, saliva of laboratory personnel. And this can result in incorrect results, loss of credibility, and can have a huge impact on financial implications as well as on the performance of the laboratory. People will come up and say that, oh, that laboratory doesn't give results for 48 hours, everything gets contaminated there. And when you are also reporting for for other diseases, we are fully aware of this is the prevalence in the community, and we are not likely to have more than that. But when a new pandemic comes or a new outbreak happens, we do not know what the prevalence in the community is. So whatever we find as positive will be reported as positive, and you realize that it is because of the contamination that is happening. So in order to control contamination, it's important to have a very robust laboratory design, to have good laboratory practices, and to have enzymatic and chemical controls, which are actually the last part. What happens is usually people see this in a reverse manner. They feel that it is the chemicals and the enzymes. I'm going to wipe my surfaces clean. I'm going to use certain chemicals. I'm going to use nucleus-free water, so no contamination is going to occur. And people are moving in and out of laboratory, and people are practicing all kinds of things. They are eating food there. So all these kinds of things ultimately affect the efficiency of your laboratories. So it's very, very important to have a PCR amplicon contamination. And you have to have a space and time separation of pre and post PCR activities. Why I say is the space separation is very simple to understand, but time separation is very, very important. If you're doing the extraction in the morning, it's better to do the master mix at some other time. Do not have both the activities going on simultaneously. Because if sometimes your exhaust fails or your positive and negative pressure equipments fail, then you will end up with a huge level of contamination in the lab. Then use of physical aids, UV light, PCR reagents, numerous positive and negative or blank PCRs are another quality issues which you can use to contain the PCR amplicon contamination. Now, when we're trying to pay so much of attention to laboratory design or setting up a PCR laboratory, it's very, very important to have what I say is a one-way traffic. Why one-way traffic is when we move from a clean area to a dirty area. What is a clean area? Clean area is the reagent room where you're making the master mix plate. It's also the sample preparation area. Very often we hear things like sample preparation is sample, so it should be the dirty area. It's not the dirty area. The dirty area is where you have a lot of amplicons when you talk about molecular biology. So you should have mechanical barriers. You should have a spatial separation of pre and post amplification work areas. And it should be at certain distance from each other. If you can't have a distance from each other, then you should have at least barriers which are there. And the flow of lab should always be unidirectional. You cannot have people moving from the amplification area, because once you have an amplified target, you are likely to bring it to sample area, then there are chances that things will get contaminated. So you have to move from an amplification product-free area to a product-rich area. Remove PPE from leaving one area to another, or best is to have separate people here and here, so that your reagents and your sample do not get contaminated with the amplified product which is already there. So the supplies also should not be allowed to move in the reverse direction or a zigzag direction. The supplies either should be dedicated, or if they have to move in an emergency, then they have to move from this area to this area. Now, why it's best to divide. So in reagent preparation areas should have a single entrance, and the reagents used for amplification should not be exposed to other areas. Specimen processing areas should not be exposed again to post-amplification work areas, and the size should be in such a manner that there is a space for equipment and bench space needed for preparation. One of the very things that we have to keep in mind is, this is from the WHO manual of setting up molecular laboratories in resource limited countries. And this is the most simplified design that one can see. Our molecular lab at MAMC is also built in a similar manner, where you have an extraction area and a reagent prep area. Now, the thing here of interest here is this pass box, which can move from here to here, so that people don't have to move. There's a pass box with double this thing. So after you prepared your reagent, you put it here and then it moves. Because the moment a person who's going to come out of here, move around and then re-enter, it's going to create a lot of problem. Now, another thing which we all have seen in this pandemic, that we need to have a PCR donning and doffing areas, and that is why this, uh, so as to say, the layout has changed a little bit with some amount of donning and doffing areas incorporated in the sample preparation areas. So engineering is very, very vital when you're developing this, because you need to have a set temperature, pressure, and humidity requirements. The reagent preparation area should have a positive pressure, whereas the sample preparation area should be in the negative pressure area. The post-amplification area again should be a negative pressure area. Then there should be the exhaust ventilation. There should be a clear-cut indications about the pressure which is there. The water quality is again very important, how it should be nucleus free and RNase free. The electric outlets, it's best to have an inline UPS. An inline UPS, we mean that all the power points which are there should be connected outside to a huge UPS rather than each equipment being connected to UPS, because one, it generates a lot of carbon footprint. Second, if the UPS breaks down or something happens, the battery leaks, there are so many things which can go wrong. So if you have one big UPS to which all the lines are connected, it's very easy to manage the laboratories. And there is something which is called as a UPS and something which is called as a power backup power system. Now, what usually happens is, suppose there is an electric breakdown. Electric systems usually have a gap of 1 or 2 seconds before they switch on to the UPS or to the backup power. So please get your engineers to work in such a manner that this gap is not there, because otherwise whole of your extraction run or the amplification run would get terminated in that second. And your whole effort along with the money and infrastructure would get wasted. So it's best to have that this, change into a backup is minimum. And then it should also have an eye wash area, a shower area, and PPE donning and doffing area, which is the need of the hour right now. Then what are the various machines that, or equipments rather, that you would require? You would require autopipettes, which are fully autoclavable and with varying volumes depending on what you're doing. Then you definitely require biosafety cabinet type 2A for extraction of these nucleic acids. You may require one more biosafety cabinet for sample accessioning areas in a situation like this pandemic. Then you obviously require a PCR enclosure on hood, centrifuge, vortex, deep freezers, -20 and -80 to store the samples as well as the reagents and the aliquoted RNAs. Then the PCR systems, ultra pure verification systems, foggers in today's condition, nucleic acid purity and integrity analysis systems like the nanodrop or spectrophotometry, automated nucleic acid extraction systems depending on what your lab workload is, 12, 24, 48, 96, 32, then a microfuge or a pharmaceutical refrigerator and a pharmaceutical refrigerator. When it comes to consumables, sometimes it looks very simple to start. What do we need? We just need a PCR kit. But along with that PCR kit, all those who are working in RT-PCR would know that there is a huge amount of consumables which require, and this build usually runs much more than the PCR kits. So you will require the biotransport carriers, the cryo boxes, cryo vials, the micro tips for your pipettes with barrier tips and with aerosol resistant tips, the isopropyl alcohol, DNase, RNase away solutions, and various sealer tapes, sodium hypochlorite for fogging, racks for keeping these tubes, PCR tubes, storage vials, and so on and so forth. So you might, the list is not exhaustive and the list is not limited to this. Many more things would be added in your own lab depending on your own requirement and working. Then when we separate these into 3 rooms, the specimen processing area or the extraction room, first thing is you need to have a very, very motivated and healthy staff to work in the extraction areas. So this manpower requirement, everyone has to think about when you are putting this. When we were starting our COVID-19 laboratory, we did a sort of survey. We asked each and every laboratory staff, residents, and the doctors in our department to write down if they have any comorbidity, any long-standing illness, and then we gave, and what their age is, and then we gave them responsibilities depending on that. If they were suffering from diabetes, hypertension, and 2 or 3 comorbidities together, and they were above 50, 55, we put them into data entry area. If they were in the middle age group, say 40 to 50, and they did not have, they had just a single comorbidity, then we put them in the reagent room area. And if only the younger ones or the healthier ones who did not have any disease, we put them in the extraction room. Now, later on, as the laboratory load increased, these boundaries merged, and people also became very comfortable. And they also, now there is a perfect interchange, and people like to work in all the areas. But earlier, this was also worked as a moral booster for most of the people, that yes, since we are sick, we've been put in the other duties, but we are contributing to the testing which is going on in the department. Then when you divide these, see, if you see here, if you need a centrifuge in these 3 places, then you can't shift the same centrifuge. You need to have these 3 centrifuge. All the pipettes should be separate. All the freezers should be separate. So neither the personnel nor the supply nor the consumables should be moving from one area to another. Then appropriate lab practices are very, very important in order to have a good working system. Now this is a PCR hood which is used to make the master mix reagent in our laboratory. So you need to have appropriate biosafety cabinets, the positive displacement pipettes, and the disposable filtered pipette tips. Avoid the production of aerosols while pipetting. Use single-use sterilized plasticware, clean room sticky floor mats, and minimize the amplicon carryover by wearing a hairnet, dedicated PPE, lab coat, gowns, gloves, sugars, shoes, covers, etc. Because what usually happens is that people who are working in the master mix area tend to think that they don't have to wear any PPE. So they just wear their apron, which they have been wearing every day. And they have been going around in the whole hospital, in the whole department, wearing those aprons and with the same. So that should not happen. They should ideally have a disposable apron or a coat, and they should be working with that. Now, if you have an automated extractors, they usually have, you just have to load the sample, and they usually come with a hood which has a UV this thing. We have these two. We have a 96 well extractor, and we have a 32 well extractor as well. So what thing which I have noticed is that it gives you a all sense of well-being when you have these extractors, that since they have their own UV cabinet, you do not need a biosafety cabinet, but you do need biosafety cabinets for 2 or 3 reasons. One, when you are accessioning the samples and loading on the initial trays of these, because the lysis buffer has to be true and trays have to be loaded. So if you have to do that, then you do need. So just having an extractor will not compensate for biosafety cabinets. So there should be clear punches between samples. You shouldn't use nucleus-free or autoclaved water, or what you call as a molecular grade water. Then the Aliquot oligonucleotides, multiple freeze thaws will cause degradation of those oligonucleotides. Always include a blank or no template control to check for contamination. For every 5 to 10 samples that you're running, even in an automated extractor, put water in it, or just a blank, just to see that whether your reagents are not contaminated. Especially in a condition where the lab positivities can range from 10% to 35%, as we have seen in the current pandemic. You never know which day is going to be your unlucky day, and you might end up with 70% positivity. So it gets you thinking that is it contamination, or is it the high positivity? Then wipe test or swab test is also recommended monthly to detect, localize, and remove contamination from this to identify the source. Then the various decontamination procedures. You should clean the work area and the equipment routinely. Clean the PCR workstation at the start and the end of each work day or run. Put on a UV light, clean with hypochlorite, and then wipe that hypochlorite with ethanol or isopropyl alcohol. Use a nucleic away solution so as to kill all the RNA and the DNA amplicon which is there in there. The most important thing to clean is your biosafety cabinet. Then, and the PCR workstation. Clean the exterior and the anterior parts of the pipettes, or they are fully autoclavable, so you might need that for some time. Then clean the equipments, the doorknobs, handles of refrigerators are the most neglected parts when you're dealing in a molecular laboratory. Then the workstations should be cleaned with 10% hypochlorite solutions, followed by removal with ethanol and water. Please remember, sodium hypochlorite, as we all know, is a highly corrosive metal. So your biosafety cabinet, which started as a bright steel equipment, will start to look like a rusted kabadiwala biosafety cabinet after a month if you do not remember to remove that hypochlorite with ethanol and water at the end of decontamination procedure. So biosafety cabinets have got their own schedules. Just to touch upon it, the airflow should be switched 5 to 10 minutes before use, and the UV should be switched for 30 minutes if the airflow is working perfect. So you switch on the airflow. If the airflow indicators are saying that the air is okay, then you wipe the work surface and the interior walls, etc. with 70% alcohol. You may use hypochlorite followed by alcohol, but it's best is to use 70% alcohol to avoid any corrosive corrosion on your system. Then if the airflow is adequate and you have cleaned, then you switch on the UV for 30 minutes and then start. Then weekly, the UV lamp should be cleaned with a gauze pipe, which is moistened with 70% alcohol. And the smoke test is recommended by some literature recommends it by weekly, some literature recommends it monthly, but the ideal way is sometimes we even do it daily. Because why we are recommending daily is that, again, in this disease, we do not know the transmission dynamics so well. So it's better to be safe than sorry. So we recommend that smoke test can be done daily. If the suppose your airflow indicators are not working very properly, at least this is a foolproof method which will tell you. Then certification should be done at installation and that annually thereafter. Most of the laboratories are NABL accredited. They are well versed with these certified equipments, but the government laboratories are not accredited very often. So there it can become a problem. So you should also try and recertify it whenever it has been relocated or serviced or repaired or after the HEPA filters have been changed. So coming on to our questions, that laboratory designs play no role in controlling contamination. So now we know that this is false. Master mix area should actually be a positive pressure area. If you have an automated extractor, then there is no need. So I've already explained why there is a need to have a biosafety cabinet. And the movement should be from this area to this area. And the separation in the lab should be for personnel as well as for supplies and consumables. Now, with that, I think we've come to the end, and the calibration should not be confused with celebration. So thank you so much.